The 1980s launched an entire generation of actresses into American pop culture. They dominated theaters. They filled cable lineups. They stared back at you from every video store shelf. Millions knew their faces. But here's the uncomfortable truth about femme doesn't guarantee longevity. Some of those careers stalled hard. Others disappeared without a trace. Yet Elisabeth Shue, she never vanished. She was everywhere. For an entire generation, she became woven into the fabric of growing up. So today, we're diving into a handful of films that defined her, exploring why she endured when others didn't, and uncovering a quiet industry shift that brought her back into the spotlight years later. Elisabeth Shue grew up in a stable, middle-class household in New Jersey. No Hollywood connections, no industry pedigree. Nothing about her arrival suggested inevitability. She started with commercials as a teenager, then gradually moved into small roles. But even early on, something set her apart. Presence. She came across as approachable and grounded, the kind of person audiences believed in immediately, and that became her signature. Unlike so many of her peers, she was rarely reinvented or dramatically restyled between projects. No shocking transformations. No wild departures. She was the girl next door, and she played that role consistently. Studios loved it. Casting directors trusted it. Audiences connected with it. She was dependable, marketable, easy to place. But there's a flip side to that kind of stability. It meant she was rarely pushed into unfamiliar territory, rarely asked to surprise anyone. And while that approach worked beautifully throughout the 80s, it quietly drew a box around how the industry saw her. Her breakout arrived in 1984 with The Karate Kid. She played Allie, Daniel's love interest. Not a massive role, but a massive film, and people remembered her. She felt real, in a way most teen movie characters simply didn't. Then came 1987, and Adventures in Babysitting put her front and center. She was warm, relatable, funny, without forcing it. Critics weren't exactly lining up with praise, but audiences connected hard. That film became a staple on TV and VHS for years. By the late 80s, Elisabeth Shue was genuinely everywhere. Cinemas, cable, video stores. But she wasn't alone in that visibility. Plenty of 80s actresses walked similar paths. Take Ally Sheedy. After The Breakfast Club and St. Elmo's Fire, she was massive. But by the early 90s, her presence faded sharply. Roles dried up. She largely disappeared from mainstream film. Then look at Michelle Pfeiffer. She had 80s visibility, Tuskar phase. Married to the Mobut, she broke through in the late 80s and early 90s with Dangerous Liaisons, The Fabulous Baker Boys, and Batman Returns. She transitioned into more complex, prestigious work and sustained momentum. Shue landed somewhere in between. She kept working, but the roles weren't elevating her now. Here's some context that matters. The late 80s and early 90s were lucrative years for actors. The VHS rental market was booming. Films that might have disappeared after their theatrical run kept circulating for years, and Shue was in plenty of them. Cocktail in 1988, Back to the Future Part 2 and 3, Soap Dish in 1991. These weren't small productions. She worked opposite Tom Cruise, Michael J. Fox, Sally Field, but the roles themselves stayed narrow. Girlfriend, love interest, supporting player. Looking back now, a lot of the actors we grew up with in the 80s operated within a fairly limited range. Not because they lacked talent, but because the roles available often hovered around similar themes. The generation before them, people like Meryl Streep, Jessica Lange, or Diane Keaton, were taken seriously earlier, largely because they were handed more adult material. The 80s brought a tonal shift. Films became lighter, more accessible. Actors emerging in that era weren't worse off, necessarily. But they arrived into a different kind of industry, one with fewer chances to stretch artistically in the same ways. By the early 90s, something shifted for Shue. She started making different choices, smaller, grittier projects, films that weren't built around her being likable or safe. In 1994, she appeared in Radio inside an independent drama that barely got distribution. Then, in 1995, she worked with Steven Soderbergh on The Underneath, a noir-tinged crime film where she played a morally ambiguous character. It wasn't a hit, but she was deliberately moving away from expectations, actively seeking material that pushed her into unfamiliar territory. And that set the stage for everything that came next. In 1995, Leaving Las Vegas hit screens. And honestly, when I first heard Elisabeth Shue was in it, I was surprised. Not because I doubted her ability, but because it felt so far removed from anything she'd been cast in before. This film is uncompromising. It's about addiction, self-destruction, a relationship that exists in the painful space between those things. Shue played Sarah, a sex worker who forms a connection with Nicolas Cage's character, a man drinking himself to death. What surprised me most watching this wasn't that Elisabeth Shue was good, it was how restrained she was. Make no mistake, this is Nicolas Cage's film. He dominates it. But here's the truth, it simply doesn't work without her. She never competes with him, never pushes for attention. She just holds her ground in a story that offers no protection to anyone in it. Nothing feels overplayed or emphasized. There's an uneasy naturalism that makes everything feel closer to life than performance. And beneath that tough exterior, real vulnerability breaks through. It's remarkably grounded work, the kind that quietly reframes everything you thought you knew about her as an actor. The Oscar nomination that followed didn't unlock some new version of her. It simply shined a light on something that had been there all along. Which naturally raises a question: how different might her career have looked if roles like this hadn't been the exception? If this had been offered to her more often? Here's what people don't always realize. Oscar attention doesn't automatically redirect a career. Shue got the nomination. She got the recognition. But the offers that followed didn't match the moment. She kept working, but became more selective. She balanced career with personal life, got married, had kids. Some people frame that as stepping back, but it wasn't. It was sustainability. She didn't need to chase volume anymore. Films like Palmetto and Hollow Man came and went. They didn't elevate her, but they didn't damage her either. She stayed in the game without burning out. Now, let's talk about television. For a long time, TV was where you ended up if film didn't work out. But in the 80s, it was also a launch pad. Michael J. Fox went from Family Ties to Back to the Future. Bruce Willis went from Moonlighting to Die Hard. Robin Williams went from Mork and Mindy to film stardom. TV was the stepping stone. Film was the destination. But then something flipped. Prestige television became the place where actors could do their best work and sustain long careers. And Elisabeth Shue arrived at that shift at exactly the right time. She showed up in CSI, Crime Scene Investigation, in the mid-2000s. Then later, Cobra Kai, where she reprised her role from The Karate Kid. And more recently, The Boys, playing a morally complicated character in one of the biggest shows on streaming. She didn't go to TV because film was over. She went because TV had become the better option. Here's what strikes me about Elisabeth Shue's story. There's nothing sensational about it. No scandal, no dramatic disappearance. It's really about timing. About when someone enters the industry and what that industry happens to value at that moment. Some actors from the same era did break into a different category. Performers like Michelle Pfeiffer, Susan Sarandon, or Geena Davis were offered roles that quickly shifted how they were perceived. Elisabeth Shue's career followed a steadier, path-long, consistent, and by any reasonable measure, successful. Leaving Las Vegas gives you a glimpse of another direction. Not one she needed, but one that makes you naturally curious about what could have been. What made her endure was consistency. She didn't wildly deviate from what worked. Her approach to characters stayed grounded and recognizable across 4 decades. She maintained good relationships within the industry. She was never truly sidelined, and she preserved that natural quality that got her noticed in the first place. She didn't buckle to trends demanding surgery or facial enhancements. She didn't try to become something she wasn't. What's fascinating is where that path ultimately led into television that isn't just respected, but genuinely embraced. Shows like Cobra Kai, which taps directly into shared nostalgia for an entire generation. And The Boys, which places her in something far darker and very much of the moment. These don't feel like steps down. They offer continuity, visibility, and roles that acknowledge experience rather than sideline it. There's something genuinely rewarding about watching actors we grew up with evolve on screen like that. And in a way, we're living in a fortunate moment right now. The pendulum has swung. Television has become a place where careers don't quietly end, they deepen. Seen in that light, Elisabeth Shue's career doesn't feel unresolved at all. It feels complete, shaped by its era. Yes, but still unfolding in a space that allows her to flourish. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this kind of deep dive, please consider leaving a like, dropping a comment, or subscribing, or hey, all three. It really does make a huge difference. And as always, I truly look forward to seeing you in the next one.